Hi, I'm Yudit Namer. I work at the Bielefeld School of Public Health. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working on migration and health. Research has been engaged in a lot of atrocities. A lot of the knowledge that we still use today come from colonial practices. So we have to address this. Decolonizing practices are, of course, one process, but in my feeling, it has to be solid.
Hi everyone, thank you for listening to this episode of Researching Diversity. I'm Tuğçe Aral. I'm a PhD student and a research associate in the Inclusive Education Department at the University of Potsdam.
Hey everyone, I'm Yudit Namer and I work as a researcher and lecturer at the working group Socialization at the Faculty of Educational Science at Bielefeld University and also in research projects at the Institute for Interdisciplinary Research on Conflict and Violence.
Today we have Yudit Namer as our guest. We're so happy to host you, Yudit, especially because your research is so important and needs so much more attention. And as we know that, you were a great colleague to Zeynep during a project you both worked in Bielefeld University. So what can you expect from this episode? This episode is about immigration, othering, and health, and how discrimination and othering influence first and second generation immigrants' health. But in this episode, you will also hear about how researchers need to challenge the long-established colonial practices in research through relational justice and relational ethics.
Besides these topics, Yudit mentions her own personal story, how she became a psychotherapist and a researcher, how having 3 different professions allows her to reclaim more space and have more sources of self-worth. As always, you can find the references to the studies that we mention on our website. And in the bonus material, you can find out information about doing PhD in Turkey. All right, let's start with the episode. Welcome, Yudit, and thanks for being here. As in every episode, we will start talking about the past. I would like to ask you, why did you become interested in the topic of migration and health?
I actually ended up researching migration and health after my arrival in Germany. Before that, when I was living in Turkey, I was mostly doing research on mental health and different determinants, different social determinants of mental health, such as gender identity, sexual orientation, experience of discrimination. And after coming to Germany, migration seemed to be an important social determinant of health. And that's how I ended up doing my research on this topic.
Wow, nice. And why did you become a researcher?
That's also quite complicated. I initially trained to be a psychotherapist, and I'm a psychotherapist. So I did my master's in clinical psychology, and I did it in the US, and I went back to Turkey. And while I was living there and working as a psychotherapist, I realized that so many social and structural constructs affect my clients' health in general. And actually, most of the things that they were bringing to psychotherapy weren't individual issues, but things that were affecting them. And they were due to social and structural inequalities. Yeah, it felt disingenuous to be working as a psychotherapist and not addressing the issues that were bringing my clients to psychotherapy. So that's how I ended up being a researcher. But I was a psychotherapist first, and I think that's how I would qualify myself. I'm first a psychotherapist and then a researcher.
Okay, then I would like to ask you, so which challenges did you encounter on the way of becoming a psychotherapist and a researcher? So you have a bridge between the science and the practice.
With psychotherapy, I think that's something a lot of people experience. I did my bachelor work in the UK and my master's qualification in the US. And one thing that I think most multicultural psychotherapists experience is the difference between different countries in terms of regulations of how you become a psychotherapist, or what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in psychotherapy. I mean, one thing I remember, for example, in the US, this very strict rule that, you cannot touch your clients. However, this doesn't work in Turkey, especially when you're working with children and adolescents. They will want to hug you. They will want to make contact with you. And if you don't do that, this is actually something that would disrupt the trust between the therapist and the clients. So I think one of the biggest challenges was to translate this type of information, this type of cross-cultural information to my practice. So that was, I think, the main challenge. And I think that's something that I experience still today. After coming to Germany, I realized it is not an automatic process. I cannot just continue working as a psychotherapist. There are different country-based regulations, the approbation processes. So yes, there is also kind of that layer of administration, which as a researcher you don't actually have. Usually once you have a degree, it automatically translates to another country, more or less, depending on the discipline. So I didn't have that when I moved to Germany. My PhD worked automatically in Germany. And also my knowledge in other countries actually enriched me, I think, while doing a PhD.
It's interesting to see the cross-cultural perspectives to psychotherapy and research. I'm also a psychologist and a researcher with migration background, and I share your opinions in that issues. Can you share what did you learn along the way? You have a long way with different cultures behind you. You've studied and researched in UK, also in US and in Turkey. Can you share your experiences on the learning way? What you have in your pocket?
What helped me having these different kind of cross-cultural experiences is, something that I shared with other researchers who kind of had to migrate to another country. There's all this topic about researcher integration into different systems. But I think academic settings are more or less very similar to each other. There are, of course, country-based barriers in every academic system. But I think it's I found it very easy to switch from one academic setting to another. I found it difficult to switch from one country to another. So our academic experiences don't necessarily translate into the country-based experiences. But I think being a researcher makes it really easy for one person to experience different cultures. And what is in my pocket in that sense is that it feels like I can survive in any country as long as I'm at a university or as long as I'm with fellow academics, fellow researchers, because that relationship seems to be, it's translatable. It seems somehow universal, so to say.
It's so impressive to hear that universities can also be a safe space and a place where we can grow, where we can change, and where we can adapt things. It's so impressive for me to hear that. We worked together in the project. I'm a junior researcher, and it was so nice to learn and now still learn from you some research and academic steps. The do's and don'ts in the science and academia. I would like to ask you, what advices would you give to other junior researchers in Germany, especially maybe for junior researchers like me with migration backgrounds who are now in the orientation stage for their PhDs or in the transition states? What advices would you like to give?
I would say reclaiming space is very important. I know space, we talk about universities being safe spaces, but those spaces aren't necessarily open. So you have to be in that space in order for that space to be safe. So my advice would be to take the space, reclaim the space. Don't let anybody take that space away from you, and make sure that you create your own spaces, even if it's a very kind of small area, like a small places that we could reclaim for ourselves. I would say trying to claim that, expand that, include as many people as possible in that space, so that our safe spaces expand. So it also creates more spaces for other people. I don't know whether that makes sense or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really appreciate your new definitions, new perspectives. We live in a post-migration society in Germany, and I think we need this kind of changes and these kind of perspectives in science, and I really appreciate it. I know that science can be with ups and downs, especially now in a corona pandemic time. Can you say something good that happened to you this week?
One thing that the pandemic, I think, allowed, that's a strange way to put it, but I think our meetings are more intimate, our teaching is more intimate. I'm very happy that, you are somehow in my home right now. I'm very happy that when I talk to my students, they are somehow in my home. And yeah, I think that's, the one upside for me, that we are kind of getting to know each other on a more intimate basis. And I have to say, the quality of my teaching, and I think, has improved because I'm more relaxed. My students are more relaxed, and this kind of makes things a little better.
So I know you are also teaching in public health. You are doing your research. You are a psychotherapist. So you have different roles for the science and for the practice. What is the feeling about being a scientist with all these roles?
I mean, first of all, it's I don't have all my eggs in one basket. So when something goes wrong, because things go wrong all the time, I think it doesn't get me down that much, in the sense that, if the teaching has gone bad one week, I know I always have my research, or I always have my psychotherapy. If I had some downs in the research world, there's always a teaching that you can compensate for. I mean, I think personally, that kind of allows me to first, reclaim more space, but also have more, sources of self-worth. That means anything specific to you. But also, I think it's having these roles make me better in each of these roles. I know I'm a better researcher because I'm a psychotherapist. I know that I think about my relationships with my research participants because I have my psychotherapy training. Or when I'm in psychotherapy and, one of my clients tell me something about the structural discrimination or racism that they experience, I know it's something that I can address in research, so I don't feel powerless in the face of hearing that. So I think that's allows me to have a little more power in each of these roles, to have multiple roles.
We are now at the end of the past part of this podcast. It was so empowering and authentic. I really appreciate your answers, your suggestions, and I have the feeling now that we have a insight to your way of becoming a researcher from so different perspectives. It's so enriching. Thank you.
This brings us to our next section, the present. What paper did you bring today?
Today I brought a paper that really inspired me called Beyond Acculturation, Immigration, Discrimination and Health Research Among Mexicans in the United States. It's by a researcher I admire very much, and unfortunately she passed away early this year. Her name is Edna Viruell-Fuentes. She is a Mexican-American researcher. I was born in Mexico, got her training in the US, and did a lot of research on health disparities and what acculturation means in terms of different generations and in terms of health. So that's the paper that I'd like to talk today.
Okay, it sounds very interesting. I also read the paper, but why is this paper an outstanding paper?
I think it's because it challenges this very kind of dominant paradigm in research, acculturation. I mean, when we talk about acculturation, usually the first thing that we talk about or we think about is Berry's model of acculturation, which is everywhere. And it's a very, very dominant paradigm, but it doesn't always take into account racism, structural discrimination, or all of these kind of structural global processes that goes outside of the individual. As a person who comes from psychology, I see the disadvantages of talking about the individual that we see in psychology most of the time, and everything is individualized. And I think what she does in this paper is to take this very psychological account of moving to another place and moving to another culture and widens it in a way that takes into account the realities of living in a place that is a new home for you.
While we were talking, you brought up this word acculturation. And could you please briefly explain what we mean with acculturation? And also, as a follow-up, this article talks about othering. And maybe can you kind of differentiate what's the differences?
Of course. I mean, it would be my definition of acculturation and my definition of othering. But I would define acculturation as a process of retaining your culture and also learning about the other person's or the host country's culture during the process of migration. So that would be my definition of acculturation. And for othering, othering is a little difficult to define in the sense that it's a really, really broad topic. But put very simply, it's the process and practices of making the other person feel excluded, feel not part of the us, and make them feel like them.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you had to explain this paper to your grandma, very, very simply, how would you put this? How would you do this?
Well, I would say to my grandma that after, who's also a migrant, by the way, so I think she would understand what this means. But yeah, what I would say to her is that after you move to another country, your experiences and your children's experiences are going to be different. And how this migration process affects you and your children will mean different health consequences for you. And I would also say that it's really important to have this intergenerational communication about this process, so that the two generations don't feel removed from each other, and have a common migration story. So, very simply.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we also talked in one of our other episodes about the family, ethnic socialization, and intergenerational communication. But I was also wondering, like I read this article, and what was very striking for me, the result that there's a difference between the first generation immigrants held and the second generation immigrants held. And I was reading that second generation immigrants are suffering more from othering, and their health outcomes, I'm guessing these are physical health outcomes, right? It's not mental health outcomes. They are like kind of worse than the first generation. And there are some protective factors why this first generation are not facing these health problems. Can you please a bit elaborate on this part of the article?
Of course, this is a very pervasive finding, by the way, that the first generation is healthier, and there's a concept called the healthy migrant effect in research, which means that the people who arrived in a new country are usually healthier than the population they left behind. But also they are healthier than the mean of the host population. And the reason being that, I mean, there are many ways of understanding this, but there's a survival effect. People who are able to migrate means that they are stronger, they are resilient, that maybe they have certain skills that kind of ended up with them being in the new country. There is what we call a selection bias, in the sense that some countries like Germany invited healthy people to come and be workers, which means the healthiest people, such as in Turkey, ended up being in Germany. And that kind of survival and selection means that the first generation is a very, very healthy generation. However, this goes down, and this doesn't stay. The migrants don't stay healthier. One understanding in the literature before Viruell-Fuentes did this research was that maybe it's practices such as diets. Most countries that say industrialized later have better dietary practices. For example, they eat more fiber, they eat more legumes. If you are a worker, it means that you exercise, or like you are active during the day, you're not sedentary. That means that these practices are what makes you healthy. And as you spend more time in the host country, your dietary practices also acculturate to the host culture, and also maybe your exercise or your diet, your sedentariness maybe also increase. So that was the explanation until this paper, which is also kind of partial explanation still. But what this paper showed is that the experience of discrimination and experience of othering also contributed to this fact, that the second generation are either more exposed to these othering messages, or they are more aware of these othering messages than the first generation. That's why this contributes to worse health outcomes for the second generation.
Maybe they're more aware than the first generation, because also maybe the first generation are feeling so less more. So I think I thought that the second generation might feel more entitled to also like question these othering, because how can, like, othering is something that, hey, I was born here, and why are you othering me? But I think first generation also have this hesitation of like entitlement. They don't feel that that's entitled to the country and the feeling of othering. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And I have this like one final question about your current research. So what are you currently researching?
Many things. Many things. My current research that I've been involved in for about 3 years was the research that we collaborated with Zeynep. is on refugee minors' access to mental health care. And how they navigate the mental health system. So that's the current project I'm employed in. The other project that I'm involved in is in the Research Institute of Social Cohesion. That is a large institute, Germany, and I'm leading a project on the health of marginalized population and what that means for social cohesion. So that's the second project that started. And the third project that hasn't started, but I'm trying to make it into a project, is on relational justice in research, which will hopefully look at ways of making sure that researchers and research participants gain the same amounts when a research study is carried out.
You also do some research about like marginalized groups and LGBTQ community, also with the refugee LGBTQ community. And as also the relation to your question, how first generations are more healthier and like they arrive to the country as like more, we are survived and we're here. But would you also, is there research that is showing that that's also the same case for marginalized groups? Because I think LGBTQ people, they're coming with more like traumatic experience to a new country.
I mean, there isn't the research that looks at these kind of outcomes also usually kind of homogenizes a migrant group and assumes that the entire migrant group has the same kind of experiences. That's why I think Viruell-Fuentes' article is also important, that it looks at different accounts of people without homogenizing their experiences. But I would say, which is something that is specific to LGBTQ migrant populations maybe, is that, as you said, Tuğçe, they come with a lot of traumatic experiences, depending on where they come from, of course. Not all countries, persecute sexual orientation, gender identity groups in a similar way. But if you have claimed asylum based on discrimination, based on sexual orientation and gender identity, this usually means that it comes with traumatic experiences. And I would say that, people who have made it here are exceptionally resilient. They're exceptionally strong. They're exceptional survivors. But I see that as like an opportunity that is taken or not taken. It is if the trauma is recognized, if the trauma is addressed, if people have access to care that would support them through their trauma, I don't see why they couldn't be a very healthy members of the new country's population. However, if these are not addressed and these are left to be to just be made worse. And also we know that the asylum process for LGBTQ people re-traumatizes people, in the sense that you have to keep telling your story. You have to say what has happened in your home country that led you to seek asylum. And these are very traumatizing. Also, having a translator with you who comes from the same country as you, you don't know what their attitudes are towards sexual orientation, gender identity. These are all very fearful, very traumatizing, very scarring experiences. And unless these processes are also trauma-informed, I think this would mean that LGBTQ people, LGBTQ asylum seekers are made to have worse health through these structures. but this isn't inherent. This doesn't come from within. This isn't individualized.
This brings us to our next section, the future. I would like to ask you, Judith, what changes would you like to see in the upcoming years regarding research on your topic, like migration, health, and othering? You have also talked with Tuce about the LGBT migration communities. What changes we need in science? What changes we need in academia?
First of all, I think we need these groups to be represented in academia. I have always felt really awkward about, being a cis person working on trans issues. It really shouldn't be my place to do such work, but it's very, trans people really have a hard time to find spaces for themselves in research. So one thing I would like to see is for LGBTQ people, ethnic minorities, marginalized identities to be in research and doing these works themselves without us having to do that. So that kind of space I would like to see. The other thing I would like to see specifically in German academia is fewer hierarchies, more kind of horizontal way of working with each other, less power on professors, more power on the Mitabau, or like people who are doing their PhDs, who are new postdocs, who are doing their masters. So I would like the power to be shared between all the participants of academia, because this affects how we do research quite a bit, and this affects how this knowledge is produced. The way that we produce knowledge is very hierarchized, and I don't think that's a good way to do research. So that's a change also I would like to see. And also I would like to see, again, the German academia to be more international, to be more open to international cooperations, to be multilingual, and I don't only mean English. It's many, I think, languages such as Turkish, Arabic could be represented in the German academia because people who speak these languages are in academia. Yes, these are the changes that I'd like to see, so that the research that we do is also better.
We are together members of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Research on Conflict and Violence under the direction of Professor Dr. Andreas Zick. And I can see there good examples in this institute. We can speak the languages, we can do the research in diversity, migration with interdisciplinary perspectives. And I would be happy that we can see these kind of good examples in academia in general. Then one question for you: what would you like to personally contribute to addressing these issues and challenging in academia or in science?
Yes, the research project that I was talking about, this relational justice, it's at the stage of looking for funding. So I am at this point not sure whether this research is going to be funded. But if it gets funded, what I would like to see is to challenge the structures within academia relationally. So when I mean relational justice in research, I don't only mean the relationship between the researchers and the research participants, but also the research structures in general, how research gets funded, who gets to speak for that research, who can apply to certain funding, what that means for all levels of researchers, from professors to research assistants or student assistants working in a project, and how knowledge is produced together. And when we do research, who gets to be authors, in the sense that whether shouldn't the participants be also authors of their kind of the knowledge that they contributed to. So I hope to challenge these structures, and I hope to again co-create knowledge regarding how to address these issues with all the people who are involved in a research relationship. But yes, I don't know whether this will get funded, because the funders are also challenged and questioned by this research. So we'll see whether it will happen or not.
I hope so. I'm pretty sure that you will get your funding for your projects and for your research. I mean, with respect to the previous successful steps you have done in research, I'm pretty sure that you will be get funded in that issue. So I want to ask Tuğçe, have you got some other questions from Potsdam?
I remember you saying relational justice, and you were saying last time we talked paying reparations. Like that word previously, it got stuck to me. Like maybe if you can talk about the relation between paying reparations with relational justice.
Of course. I mean, the term relational justice comes from conflict research. And it talks about when atrocities happen in a society, in a country, in order for that society to move forward, there has to be some justice that is achieved for the victims of the process, and this has to be relational, meaning that the perpetrators have to make amends somehow. Reparations is just one of these amends that could be made, and like we see that in processes such as genocide, for example. Of course, this doesn't cover. This doesn't undo any of the atrocities, but there has to be a step in order for moving forward. And research has been engaged in a lot of atrocities. We know how a lot of the knowledge that we still use today come from colonial practices. A lot of the research on health come from settlers going into spaces that they have colonized and colonizing other people's bodies without asking for consent, without giving anything back. Basically, a lot of the things that we who are kind of big terrorists or names in research are colonizers. So we have to address this. Decolonizing practices are, of course, one process, but it has to be, in my feeling, it has to be solid. There has to be an apology. There has to be some kind of either giving authorship to these kind of ideas, or to pay something back from the institutes that actually earned a lot of money from research practices. And I think that's part of what I mean by reparations. Mm-hmm. But I also think that it doesn't have to be on such a large scale. I think we could all go back and look back at any of our research practices and see whether we have neglected any process, or whether there were any kind of unjust things that we have done in relation to our research practices. And I'm sure we will all find something, because this isn't, we are not taught that. None of us are really taught this aspect of relational ethics in our studies. We are taught about procedural ethics. We know what informed consent is. We know what confidentiality means. We know about data protection, but we don't actually, nobody teaches us about how to form a relationship, from a human relationship with the participants that we do research with. So I think that also means something on an individualized researcher base. I think we can all look back If we have made any mistakes, we can reach out to the communities if they still welcome us, and address these issues and ask if we can make anything better, and also ask if we can make anything better for them. And I think that's part of the responsibility, and I think this responsibility doesn't end after the research ends. And yeah, if you have a 40 years of research career, I think you will find a lot of issues. I have, a 10 years research career, and I have issues. I know I have issues. And I'm trying to do that myself as well.
Yeah, thank you. These are all great suggestions, and they make me think of the things I can do in my next research. So I want to ask you, if you would create a checklist called How to Conduct a Relationally Just and Ethical Research, what would be some of your concrete to-dos for this list?
I think one thing that can be done is to involve the people we want to do research with from the beginning. I know at the PhD stage that doesn't really happen. At the PhD stage in Germany, you are usually hired into a project that's already funded. So you don't necessarily have a say in what the topic is or what the research questions are. They're already settled and they're in front of you. But still, during the kind of ethics application process, I think the representatives of the subpopulation that you want to do research with could be involved. There should, I think, always be pilot studies that take into account the ethical issues. Because usually when we do pilot studies, it's only to see whether the procedure works or whether the instruments work or whether the interview questions work. It's never about the relationship. How that relationship should be. And I think the pilot studies should also address that. And I think one issue is that there should always be some transfer. Even if, as researchers at a certain point, at an early career researchers, we are not in the process of, let's say, paying the participants or something, when we don't have that power. I think we can still volunteer, spend our time with the communities, translate our research in a way that benefits the people, not just us, not just the researchers. So it's just, I know it's extra efforts. Unfortunately, these efforts are not counted as our work time. They are not counted as, you cannot put this anywhere. Or this usually doesn't mean anything for a person's career, but still, I think an extra effort should be done, and I think this should come from top to bottom. I don't there's also this issue of usually the younger people or the people with the earliest career stage having to do all of these things, having to volunteer, having to do all the work, having to do the pilot, having to do about everything about the ethics. But I think it should come from the people with the most privilege. So the professors, the PIs, whoever has the most responsibility and whoever is going to gain the most from this research relationship, I think they should be also the ones involved in all of these reparations or all of these relational giving back parts of the research.
I think all of these things you said are great and very valuable. And I'm hoping both junior and senior researchers to hear you out and also maybe start engaging in relational justice in their research already.
Yudit, your perspective is very, very empowering for us, especially for me. I am happy that we had the connection in frame of this podcast. As a wrapping up of this episode, one final question for you. How do you stay motivated as a researcher and lecturer in your job?
Things like this helps. I think the teams that we build, the collaborators we have, I think keep us motivated. I know I have wonderful colleagues that I work with, and I'm really excited to work with them, and I'm really excited to see what new things we can create together. So I think these teams are really kind of motivating, and I think that's also something that I could say to people who are looking for PhD places, for example. I think the university doesn't matter. I think the topic doesn't really matter that much, because there's so much time to do anything you want to do in the future. I think what matters is the team, whether the team is supportive, what kind of growth potential these kind of spaces kind of give you, because it's always the people for me that keeps me motivated. It's always the people I work with and what we can co-create. And it's similar with teaching. I think I'm always so excited to see my students. And one thing that I still miss every single day is my students that I had to leave behind in Turkey when my university was shut down. And that's, like those kind of relationships, I think, what motivates me. And that's where the relational justice comes from. I think the work we do is so relational, and motivation is also relational for me.
Wow, thanks so much for this, for the statement. It also motivated me right now. Have you got some final statements, announcement, or something else you want to share with us or with the audience right now?
I came to Germany as an at-risk scholar after my university was shut down. I was teaching at Yudit University in Izmir, and it was shut down under the statutory decree by the Turkish government. And after that, of course, a lot of people were dismissed from their positions, their posts as university professors, university researchers. And my colleagues who are back in Turkey are engaged in what we call solidarity academies. So they are forming so many different structures that are research structures, knowledge structures that are outside of the university. So although I said that universities are safe spaces for me, they weren't a safe space for me back in Turkey. And I think that solidarity academies are places like that. And I would encourage anyone who listens to this podcast to check out the work that is being done at research structures that are outside of universities. One other structure in Germany is Off University. It is a structure where dismissed academics from Turkey and other places who cannot leave their country for many administrative reasons can teach in German universities. And German universities could allow this to happen if they offer a contract through this Off University structure to a dismissed academic who has so much knowledge that they cannot necessarily share. So that's also something that I would encourage people who listen to this podcast to check them out. Take courses from Off University, support Off University, and just think outside of the university bubble when we talk about research.
Thanks, Yudit, a lot. Thank you so much for joining us today and for helping us also increase the visibility of outstanding social scientists as yourself and of cutting-edge research. And thank you for all listening, and talk soon on the other episodes. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and talk soon.
Thank you for having me here. I mean, I'm really happy to have been invited, and I'm really happy to have had this conversation with you.
We want to thank Minor Revisions for the music, Puffhouse for post-production, and Lotte Koiman for the logo design. Make sure to follow us on social media at Researching Diversity.